Today we're going to build some RGB 350Z taillights. And as always, we're going to start with the parts that you're going to need for the build. Get the most obvious thing out of the way. We are going to need an LED kit. You can get this kit from Luminescetic or from Stop Motion Lighting. The main difference between this kit and what we're actually building is we are not going to use the provided LEDs that this comes with. We're going to be using LEDs from Next Level Neo. These are going to be 5mm through-hole RGB addressable LEDs. This customer is going all out with this build, so we're doing clear lenses and we're doing full color shifting show mode. So no regular just red, no plug and play. It's going to be a full custom harness, full everything. The next thing you're gonna need is a set of brand new aftermarket taillights. I personally don't want to get them out of the box and ruin the finish on them, but you will definitely see them in this video. These are just your run-of-the-mill aftermarket clear lens lights that you can find on Amazon or eBay. I'll have them linked down below. This is obviously going to be mostly soldering. We are going to spend hours soldering. So what you're gonna need next is a soldering iron. You can buy one of these for like 10 bucks on Amazon if you don't have one. And then I recommend getting a roll of really thin solder itself, just because the thin stuff is a lot easier to work with. We are going to have to trim the leads on those LEDs, so I like to have a good pair of wire snips. Once we get to the point where we're actually wiring them up, we're going to need a good pair of wire strippers. I like the automatic ones, some people don't. Do what you want to do. And to actually control these things, we are going to need a Blue Ghost module. This thing is going to control the show modes. It has an app and it controls all of the factory functions. So definitely go Blue Ghost over one of those cheapo ones on Amazon. Speaking of the Blue Ghost module, you are going to need to wire that up with some wire. We have several options for wire over here on this really small wiring rack. So we typically go with the RGB style right here for the actual addressable to the Blue Ghost. And then for any like power and ground inputs, we just have a big spool of it. Biggest thing that you're gonna do, no matter what kind of wire you go with, is loom it. Please protect those wires. One, it looks better, and two, it protects it. Same vein, make sure you get yourself an inline fuse. So these next two things really depend on how you personally want to do the build. If you're a builder building it for someone else, you don't have to do it like this. I personally try to make it as plug and play as possible for the customer. So like I said, this is just an option. But what I do is I buy the actual bulb sockets for the taillights off of the Nissan parts website. Shockingly expensive, by the way, probably about $60 per socket. And then I get some of these little connectors. They're bulb style connectors. You can plug those in and then run the wires out of the housing. And what that allows you to do is create a plug and play setup for the customer so that they don't have to mess with it. If you're just building it for yourself, all you really need to do is just tap into the appropriate wires. Park, brake, run it down to the turn signal, whatever you want to do. Before we get started on the actual build, let's talk about these through-hole addressable LEDs. I had a horrible first experience with them. So if you're gonna do a project with these, I highly recommend that you do something kind of like this. This is gonna be way easier than what we did, which was a two-piece. Two-piece taillights really complicate everything. So I recommend sticking with something small. If you could start these with something really, really small, like an FRS or even like just a fog light, where it's a couple of these, it's gonna be a lot easier and a lot easier to see how they work and figure out how they work. This LED right here has 4 pins. And I'm going to put up a cheat sheet just so you can see what each of them does, but I'm also gonna tell you. Short, medium, long, and then short again. The first short one, right next to the medium pin, is going to be your data in. So we got data in. The medium pin, right next to that, is going to be your ground. Your long pin is your power, which is 5 volts. And your data out is going to be the last. Now saying that and then building it are two different things. It gets a little bit confusing depending on the shape of the light that you're doing. If it's something with just a bunch of straight lines, grid pattern, great easy way to get into this, great easy way to start. To help visualize this for you, I am going to go ahead and mark it with a paint pen. One thing we need to remember is the way that this is actually facing. So this is going to be the driver's side tail light, which means that this pin right here, this circle, is the most inward circle. This is the trunk, this is the body. So when we flip it over, this is the trunk, this is the body. So the way that we want this to go is we want it to start here at this pin, which I'm calling pin 1, and we want it to go in that direction. That's a little arrow, in case you can't see it. And it's going to keep going this direction until it gets to this very last circle, where it is going to go up and around. This is the direction that you're going to put the data inputs and outputs in. And then we're gonna snake the datas all the way up the entire taillight board until it's done. So really, once you get the basic idea and you've done like 1 or 2 rows, it's really not hard. It just becomes extremely tedious. Okay, now it's time to get started. We got the board all marked up and we know what direction we want the data to flow. First thing we need to do is we need to remember which of these pins is our data in, and of course it is this very first one, the shorter pin next to the medium pin. We are going to set it, we need to push it into the hole with the data facing the data in, facing the inside part of the board, and then the data out is going to flow to the next hole in line. And then for the power and ground, you just need to pick. If you want the power to go this way, then you need to fold it that way, or you can go this way. I'm probably just gonna do this way so I don't keep bending the pin. And then ground is gonna go here. And what we're actually going to do is connect all of the grounds on the next row with this row's grounds, so that there will be one ground going down the middle of it. And the next thing that we need to do that is going to be pretty important is to actually trim all of the pins. That's what the wire snips are for. We're gonna go ahead and trim all of these so that the whole project is really clean. There we go, that is and there we go, that's one LED done. Now, one thing I don't like is how far up this is sticking. So all that we need to do is take a small flathead screwdriver and push it further down in there. To be a little bit more efficient, I found that it's slightly quicker, really not much, but slightly quicker if we just go ahead and trim the LEDs before we put them in place. So I'll do like an entire row. I'll go ahead and trim up an entire row of these and then we'll put them in place. And then you may be wondering, how do you know which way to go since all the LEDs are trimmed up? Well, it's got a flat spot on the LED. So once it's all trimmed, you just put the flat spot facing the same direction as the LED that you already put in there. Now that we have the new LED in place, we can go ahead and fold the pins down. You can do this by hand. I like to use a little screwdriver, otherwise these pins will slice you. And make sure to have your power going in the same direction and your ground going the same direction as the LED beforehand. Just like that, we're gonna solder those 2 little points together. 2 LEDs soldered together. Just have to do this so many more times. If you look really closely, you can see I did this wrong. I matched up the wrong pins here. So unfortunately, we have to go back and flip this entire row around. Okay, we've got 2 rows done, but I have some critiques for myself. The main thing being this ground setup that I got going here. This is incredibly inefficient and to be honest, it's pretty ugly. So what I need to do next time is actually leave the leads a little bit longer so that they can actually fold over and connect to one another. And then we can run our main ground wire all the way down the middle so that it's just 1 instead of 2. We have a lot more to go. In the next 1 to 2 rows, I'm probably gonna go ahead and add our wires so that we can properly test it and make sure that everything is looking good before we continue. Make sure I'm actually wiring everything up properly. Our test is working out really well. You can tell that with this specific show mode, you can actually see the direction that the data is flowing. And this is our tester right here. It's actually just an old Blue Ghost module. I'm actually pretty sure that this side over here doesn't even work, so it's a perfect tester for us. Now, when we flip it back over, I did want to show you that whenever you're building these, you will have to move the power up to the next row. So we're gonna have to do this all the way down. And personally, what I like to do is try to do it on both sides so that the power flows evenly up the light. Of course, we'll have to do that for the power and ground just to make sure that there's even distribution of power and ground all the way. These next level Neo LEDs do have capacitors in them, which is gonna help the voltage flow. It's gonna keep it moving, but just in case, to provide a little bit of a backup, it's a good idea to go ahead and run the powers evenly up and down the sides. Next thing we gotta do is just install the rest of the LEDs. We are gonna be here a while. All of the LEDs have been fully installed, so now we can actually test the whole board. More than likely, something's not gonna work. It could be one LED, it could be 90% of the board. I'm not sure. Every single time I've built a set, there's always like one solder joint that's not touching properly or something like that. So let's go ahead and test it. Got our Blue Ghost app here. And just like we thought, something is wrong. Okay, so it's flowing really well until we get to this chip right here. The way that we go about repairs for a set like this is by going to the first chip that's causing problems. And I can visually see that there's an issue with connection right here at this pin. If I put my screwdriver in there, it starts to work properly. What we do now is we repair that pin, retest, find another spot that's not working, repair that pin, and we do that over and over and over again until the entire board is working as it should. Just watched hours of me building this, so I'm probably not even gonna show you the repair part because that is so boring. So the next thing that you're gonna see is us actually cutting open the tail light. This is the light that we are going to install the inner board onto. Full video of how to actually open these up. So we're not gonna go over everything, but I am going to cut in some footage of us actually opening the light so that you know what you're getting into. How to open 350Z tail lights. First off, I'd like to start with showing you all the tools that you'll need. Okay, let's start over here on the right side. Obviously, we're gonna need the taillights that you're gonna use. Like I said at the beginning, this is gonna be based on the aftermarket set, but it works for the OEM as well. Next up is cling wrap. I use cling wrap to protect the lens and keep it pristine. As you can see, there are no scratches because it's brand new. I wanna keep it that way. Next up is gonna be some sort of cutter. We will be cutting the lens off. So I am gonna use the Wonder Cutter. It's an ultrasonic cutter, creates a very thin cut. I really like it for these kind of projects. If you don't have it, this is about $400. If you want a cheaper option, go with a Dremel. The diamond bit is about 20 bucks. The Dremel is probably 100 to 150. That's a really good combination and it'll get the job done. It just makes a little more dust. Next up is gonna be some flatheads. I really like these pocket screwdrivers. They get in really, really thin areas pretty easy. You know, just various size Phillips head screwdrivers. After that, shoe goo or goop metal adhesive. This stuff actually holds super well, stands up to heat really well. You know, driving around in the Texas heat, you're probably gonna need to keep that lens on, don't want it to melt. This stuff ain't going anywhere. After that, keep it watertight with some silicone. I prefer the black silicone, and I always go with silicone 2. Silicone 1 is more likely to shrink up and break down. Silicone too, we've never had an issue with. And before I forget, there is one more tool that I like to use on every single build that I do. It's these rubber mats right here. It just protects the lens just in case something happens, you know, if you drop it too hard or do something. Real nice to have. Time to cut. Oh yeah, there we go. Boom. Now we are at this point. The lens is off. We just need to take out the red reflectors and the LEDs, and then we're gonna start test fitting to see if we have to cut anything on the actual housing in order for the board to fit. So we need to pop these reflectors out. And we need to take these LEDs out. To do that, we have to remove this butyl here and here and take these screws off. Now we can actually test fit the board, and it is not looking like it's gonna fit without some major trimming. So what I'm thinking is that we are going to have to trim this section right here first to try and get this front piece to sit further in on the inner housing. If we do that, then I'm thinking that the rest of this will probably sit just fine, but we won't know until we can get this front piece trimmed up. Trimming up these inner housings is really just more of a trial and error type of thing. So we're just gonna have to cut, retest, until the inner housing actually fits where we want it to. And now the housing is completely trimmed out so that we can actually get this board to fit and fit almost flush. As you can see, we did have to trim all of this and trim this piece right here out, as well as right up here. Since this was pushing everything up, it was gonna hit the lens. So everything is trimmed out. But if you look, the board is a little bit still bent upward. So unfortunately, since I already have the LEDs installed, we're gonna have to run with it on this side. But for the other side, I can go ahead and rebend it to fit a little bit better. It's just a sheet of acrylic, and I had it stored here in my garage. So I'm sure it got a little bit warped before we actually started working on it, and I should have double checked beforehand. To actually get the board to stay in place while we are gluing it, we're gonna have to use several sets of clamps and some tape just to get the board to kind of sit where we want while this cures up. We are gonna have to let it cure up overnight, unfortunately. The custom LED board is officially sitting in place inside the inner housing. And if we go ahead and grab it, you'll be able to see it is on there. It's not going anywhere. So what we can do now is actually start to install the lens. Now this is gonna be just like whenever you do a clear lens swap on a set of these. We're gonna set it in place and then glue it down, and then we'll silicone it. Of course, we gotta take the brown paper off first. And we've got the lens completely installed onto the taillight, but if you notice, we can still see this cut line. We can see all the glue and everything. So what we need to do is get this light painted. So we're gonna go ahead and start working on that now. While we're waiting for that to cure, we can go ahead and get the Blue Ghost module wired up. So I'm just gonna remove the last one. Okay, I've determined that I need about this much wire on either side, so I'm gonna get 2 more of these. Okay, all the wires are cut. Now we can start adding it to the Blue Ghost module. I'm gonna start with the output. I stripped just a little bit off so that it's enough to go in, but not enough to have excess wire hanging out of the screw connectors. This is why you need a really small screwdriver, because the screw terminals are extremely small. We've got all of our inputs wired in, and we have our outputs wired in for the right and left light. Now we can do the power and ground. So the way I figure out how much power wire I need is a little ridiculous. I kind of just gauge it from the outside of the car. I'll just show you. Okay, we need about that much. And we have the power and ground wire. Okay, we've got the converter on there and the power wires on there. And I know that this looks like a total mess, but once I put the loom on it, it's going to clean up really nicely. And again, the converter is only because I'm using 5-volt addressables and not 12. This is pretty much completely wired up. The only things we'll have to do now are add some loom and some connectors. There's a few options when it comes to connectors. JSTs is an option. The only problem with that is that they are not waterproof, so a lot of people don't like to use it for headlights. I'll still use them for taillights here and there, but a lot of people want to use the waterproof ones that screw on. So really, it's up to you what you want to use. Of course, before we do the connectors, you have to do loom, otherwise you won't be able to get the connector on there. Okay, and now you can tell just how much better this looks with the loom versus without. The paint is done. Taillights are completely painted. The Blue Ghost module is completely wired and loomed. So now we can just do some quick testing and just take a look at these things. These things are insane. So we have this side completely wired up, ready to go, fully sealed and everything, but this side is not. So the way that I do these builds now is I have one full side get built out on YouTube, then I have one full side that gets built out for short form content. So mostly TikTok, although looks like that's gonna get banned. So just short form content is for the other side. Even though this light is fully sealed and is wired to the Blue Ghost module, we still have to build out this side before we can finish the project. But that doesn't mean that we can't run through all the settings here and just take a look at these things.